Today we'll begin talking about the matter of what are we going to do so that we can live without suffering, without dukkha. If there's no suffering, no misery in your lives, then there's nothing for us to talk about. The Buddha taught only about dukkha or misery, suffering, pain, and the quenching of suffering. So anyone who doesn't have this difficulty of suffering, then there's nothing to talk about. But if in your life there is any suffering, any pain, then we have something to talk about. And so we'll be speaking about dukkha, both in the aspect of personal suffering, and then in the aspect of general dissatisfactoriness, unsatisfactoriness that's all around. This is what we'll talk about today. Something that we should know further is the question of who or what suffers. Who is it or what is it that suffers? In Buddhism, it's a very fundamental tenet that there is no such thing as a soul, an ego, a self, or anything of that sort. There's just mind, consciousness, and this body complete with the nervous system. And together this mind and body can do all kinds of strange and wonderful things. It's only our ignorance that mistakes this, that sees an ego, a self, or a soul in all of this activity. There's just the body and the mind. And it's this mind, no self or soul, but just the mind which suffers. And then you must know further that because these two things work together, it's really one single thing. We can talk about body, mind, mind, body, but really it's just one thing. Without a body, the mind can't do anything. And without mind, the body is absolutely worthless. So it's only by the two working together that we've got anything worthwhile. And so it's really just one thing. It's this one thing working that does everything. But through ignorance, we take part of it to be a self or soul, although there's really no such thing. The next thing we need to know is that the pure mind, the natural pure mind, does not suffer. There is no misery or pain in the natural mind, in this pure mind. But when something new arises, a new concoction we call the defilements, the kilesa, that is how suffering occurs. The original mind, the primal natural mind, doesn't suffer, has no suffering. But only when these new things, these defilements come up, only then does suffering occur. Ordinarily, the defilements are coming up all the time, all over the place. And so we study Dhamma in order to know how to not let the defilements occur. And when there's no defilements coming up, then there's no suffering, no dukkha. And that's all there is to know. So then it's necessary to know and understand three things. Know what the citta, the mind is. Know what mind is. And then know what these defilements are and how they arise. And then know what dukkha is and how dukkha, suffering, misery, occurs because of the defilements. This is what we need to understand, these three things. As far as that self or soul that some people talk about, it's just a kind of ignorant thinking. It's just a kind of stupidity that mistakes things to be a self or a soul. But all that's taking place and all you need to know is just this mind, and then how the defilements happen, and then how suffering grows or comes out of those defilements. Just these three things: the mind, the kilesa defilements, and dukkha, suffering, misery. The pure mind, the original natural mind, is something that can be observed, but we never bother to pay attention to it. We never bother to be aware of it. The defilements are things that we don't pay much attention to either. Instead, we're satisfied by them, we take pleasure in them, we indulge in them, rather than being satisfied with that pure natural mind. These are the two things we need to observe and see the difference between them, the pure mind and then the defilements that arise. This pure mind is occurring, and so you can learn about it, although it doesn't happen so often. The defilements are coming up quite a bit, and so you have to look between all those defilements to see the pure mind. But once we begin to notice and observe the natural original mind, then we can learn how to maintain that state of mind, to preserve it, protect it. And this is what the Dhamma is for, to help us to protect, to maintain the pure original state of mind that is free of the defilements. So now let's examine the question of how do the kilesa arise? How do the defilements come up? To put it as briefly and simply as possible, it works like this. Take the mind now that is void, that is free, the natural mind. And then there is this body with eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the physical sense and the tangible sense and the mind sense, this body with the six sense doors. And then these six senses are able to receive stimuli from outside, to receive external sense objects, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and mental stimuli. So these external objects make contact with these internal senses. Let's take the example of the eyes specifically to see what happens. So there's the eye sense, and then a sight, an object of the eye. When the two come together, there arises eye consciousness, a fundamental mental knowing of that interaction, that vision. When these three come together, eye, sight, and eye consciousness, we call that phassa, or contact. In this case, eye contact. Now this is the crucial point. At this moment of contact, of the basic sense experience, if there is mindfulness and wisdom present, then no defilement arises. If it's mindful and wise, no defilement arises. But if mindfulness and wisdom are lacking, then defilement occurs. Put briefly, this is the crux of the matter. If that phassa, that contact, lacks mindfulness and wisdom, then it's foolish contact or stupid contact. If the contact is foolish, then there arises foolish feeling. Feeling is a natural. Contact always gives birth to feeling. But if that contact is foolish, is stupid, then everything that comes from it will also be foolish. And so the feelings that arise towards foolish contact are stupid feelings. There's no mindfulness and wisdom regarding these feelings. And then if this happens, those feelings give birth to the defilements. If it's a nice feeling, a lovely feeling, then this gives birth to loving that feeling, wanting it, liking it, desiring it. If the feeling is unpleasant, unattractive, then this gives rise to dislike, to hatred and anger. If the feeling is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, then the mind gets confused. It doesn't know how to react. It wonders. It's uncertain. And this is a third kind of defilement. This is what we need to observe, how if the original contact is stupid, there arises stupid feeling which gives birth to the defilements. It works just like this. This is something that is of great importance for us to observe and understand so that we can deal with this situation properly. If the feeling is foolish, then it gives rise to defilement, what we call tanha, or craving. If there's this foolish feeling, then there arises this foolish desire that we call tanha, craving. This craving can take various forms, various defiled forms. If the feeling is pleasant, attractive, then this can give rise to craving in the forms of greed, lopa, and lust, raga. If the feeling is unpleasant, it can give rise to defilements in craving in the form of tosa, hatred, and kota, anger. If the feeling is neither attractive or repulsive, pleasant or unpleasant, or if it's kind of all mixed up, we can't sort out whether it's pleasant or unpleasant or there's both mingled together, then the mind gets confused. This leads to the defilements of moha, of delusion, of infatuation, of getting lost in the thing. So there are these three kinds of defilement arising due to the different kinds of feelings that come from ignorant contact. If it's a pleasant feeling, there arises a positive reaction, which is this greed or lust that pulls in, that's a pulling in of things. And then if it's an unpleasant feeling, it leads to the negative kind of defilement, which is a pushing away, a knocking away, that is like hatred and anger. But if there's this mixed up kind of feeling, not sure whether it's positive or negative, can't really make it out, then the mind is confused and it runs in diluted circles, infatuated with that experience but not knowing what to do. These are the three kinds of defilement, three aspects of craving which occur if there's no mindfulness and wisdom. If because of ignorant contact it's gotten to the point where there are these different kinds of defiled reactions, then it goes even further. If there arises this feelings of love, of greed, of lust, if this is going on, this reaction is going on in the mind, then there arises a further illusion, the illusion of then something that loves, that is greedy. So if there's greed arises in the mind, then the mind takes this, assumes that there must be a greedy one, something which is the owner of that greed, or the one who is greedy, the lustful one. If it's the negative kind of reaction of anger, of hatred, of wanting to destroy, to get rid of, to kill. Then there arises the illusion. This is a feeling in the mind, but it's pure illusion. It has no basis in reality. And this illusion takes it there to be someone who is angry, the angry one or the hating one, the owner, the possessor of this anger and hatred. And if the reaction is one of confusion, of uncertainty, of infatuation, of delusion, then the mind regards that there must be the one who's confused, the I, the ego that is confused, that is deluded. And so from these three kinds of the positive, negative, and confused reactions of the mind, there arises what we call upadana. Upadana, the sense of an I, the sense of mind involved in these reactions, that there must be someone who is greedy or angry or confused. This leads to what we call upadana, or clinging. In short, there are three basic kinds of defilement. There's the greedy, lustful kind, which is a pulling in, a sucking in of experiences. The second kind is the anger, hatred kind, which is a pushing away, a trying to destroy and kill, a negative kind of defilement. And then the third kind is of confusion and delusion, where it's like the mind running in circles around the object of experience. There are these three kinds of defilement. When these arise in the mind, then, the mind that was once peaceful, still, pure, natural, now is taken over by these kinds of defilement. Where the mind was once free, now it is forced to react in these three kinds of ways, sometimes pulling in, sometimes pushing away, sometimes running around in confused circles. This is what suffering is about. This is dukkha. The mind that was once free and light is now forced to do this heavy burden. This work of pulling in, pushing away, and running in circles is very heavy work. It's a real burden on the mind. And so this is how dukkha arises, from having the mind that has become trapped into these reactions, having to do the heavy work of pushing away, or of pulling in, pushing away, and running in circles. The heaviness of it, the burdensomeness of it, this is dukkha, misery. When the mind is pulling or pushing or running in circles, it's hot. The mind is heated up by these reactions. So when there's the pulling in kind of reaction, the greedy, lustful reaction, that's a fire. We call it the fire of lust. Or in the negative kind, the pushing away, that's another kind of fire. We call it the fire of hatred. And then that running around in circles, that's another kind of fire. We call it the fire of delusion. These are the three kinds of fires that burn the mind. The first, the fire that comes from raga, or lust. We say that this is the wet fire, the soaking fire. When lust arises, it burns the mind. But it's a kind of burning that we enjoy, we like it. It pulls us in, it entices us. We get infatuated with it, we indulge this loving and lusting. And so and all the time that it's burning the mind, we consider it enjoyable and good fun. This is what we call the wet fire, the soaking wet fire of lust. try to know this as well as you can, because try and know this as well as you can every time that this feeling takes over the mind. The second kind, the negative pushing away of anger and hatred, we call this the dry fire, or the parched fire. With this anger and hatred, at first there's something tasty about it. When anger first arises, there's something seductive and delicious about it. At first it's sweet, but then then the flames start to shoot up. It starts to scorch and boil. And then that sweetness very quickly becomes bitterness, a very disgusting bitterness. And so we call this second fire the dry fire, the fire that burns and boils and roasts the mind, the fire of hatred. You need to try and understand this, observe it, become familiar with it every time it takes over the mind. The third fire, that is the fire of delusion, we call this the fire of darkness, the dark fire. With this fire, there arises this delusion, this confusion, not knowing what to do. It becomes fear, worry, anxiety, envy, all kinds of foolishness and stupidity. And then all these kinds of delusion lead us to make many mistakes. And all these mistakes get us further and further into trouble. And this delusion also leads to the other kinds of fires, the soaking wet fire of lust and the dry fire of hatred. And so get to know this fire, this dark fire, whenever it takes over the mind. Whether we call them the wet fire or the dry fire or the dark fire, all of them scorch the mind. They're all burning hot. Look for yourself whenever love and lust come up in the mind. How does that burn and scorch? When anger and hatred come up in the mind, how does that burn and scorch? You can feel this for yourself, know it for yourself. And when the dark fire of delusion comes into the mind, how does that burn and scorch and incinerate? When this stupidity takes over the mind, when you want to do something and you can't do it, how does that burn and simmer and bake? All these kinds of fires, the dark, the wet, the dry, and the dark fires, all of them are burning. You can understand this by observing your own experiences of these fires. That the pure natural mind doesn't suffer at all. But when there's ignorance, no mindfulness and wisdom at contact, then these defilements arise. These defilements come in and burn the mind. This burning of the mind that arises because of ignorance, this is dukkha. This is suffering. Suffering doesn't occur due to any other cause. It happens because of the mind's own ignorance. Originally the mind was cool, free, and at peace. But because of its wrong understanding, its foolishness, its stupidity, it gives birth to foolish feelings and these crazy defilements. And this burns and tortures the mind. This is how dukkha, suffering, misery arises within us. It doesn't happen because of God. God doesn't make us suffer. So you can't go and blame God for your suffering, or you can't pawn off your sins on God. It's happening through our own ignorance. And so rather than blame it on God, why not look inside and see what's really responsible for this, and then set about trying to straighten this situation out. God doesn't cause these defilements. God doesn't cause this burning. These defilements come out of our own stupidity. The burning happens because of our own foolishness. When there is foolish sense contact and then stupid feelings, these defilements, these fires occur. They happen because of our own stupidity. So you can't go and blame it on God. We bring this burning upon ourselves. So then why go ask God to help us? If it's not God's fault, if God isn't causing the problem, then what good does it do to go and ask God for help? If the problem is happening within because of our own stupidity at contact with our own foolishness regarding the feelings, then shouldn't we come and try and solve the problem within ourselves rather than asking for someone else to help us? If the problem, if the ignorance is inside, then we've got to straighten it out in here, to understand how this works, so that when there's contact, instead of there being ignorance and foolishness, we can replace that ignorance with wisdom. So this is why we study Dhamma, not to ask someone else to help us, but through our own study and experience to develop the wisdom of Dhamma, so that then none of these problems, none of these fires will flare up and burn the mind and make it suffer. This is why we study Dhamma, to help ourselves. We suffer because of our own stupidity bringing up the defilements. If there wasn't any stupidity, the defilements wouldn't arise and we wouldn't suffer. So if we can put out this stupidity, then there won't be any of the defilements and we won't suffer, we won't experience dukkha or misery. Now if God can help us anything that helps us to put out that ignorance, to extinguish that ignorance, that will help to free us from suffering. If God can help us to put out the ignorance and put out the fires of defilement, then that will help us to quench suffering. But if the real cause is in our own ignorance, why not deal with that ignorance directly? Learn to eliminate that ignorance so that the defilements don't cause any more pain and suffering. The Dhamma is what we call the thing that will eliminate, that will help us to get rid of that ignorance. When we come to Suan Mokkh, we come solely to study the Dhamma, to study it and learn how to put it into practice, so that Dhamma will help us to eliminate, to quench all stupidity and ignorance, so that the defilements no longer burn and torture the mind. You can ask God or someone else for help if you want, but why not just deal with our own ignorance, which is the real cause of all our suffering? And Dhamma is the thing which will help us to do that. Because of the mistakes we make, because of our own stupidity, this is what causes sin. Sin is the product of the mistakes that we make because of our foolishness. All sin, all defilement just comes from our own mistakes because we don't understand correctly. And so to get rid of sin, all we have to do is get rid of this ignorance which is the cause of all sin. There's no need to go and pester God or bother God to come and help us. We can just deal with this problem on our own without making any trouble for God. And so learn to get rid of this ignorance, which is the cause of defilements and all the mistakes we make, and then all sin. And then there won't be any suffering. Satan, the worst, most enormous Satan that exists, is our own ignorance. Our own foolishness is the real meaning of Satan. If we can eliminate and destroy this foolishness, this ignorance, then that's the same as killing Satan. And then there are no more problems. If we can kill Satan, then every time that there is sense contact, any time there's seeing, hearing, smelling, and so on, then there's no ignorance. And so the defilements don't arise and there's no suffering. So just kill this Satan, and that will end all the problems. This matter of contact and feelings, it works the same way for all the senses. The way that we just described it, how it works for the eyes, for the ears, nose, tongue, body sense, and mind sense, it works in just the same way. The way that contact and feeling operate, and whether there's mindfulness and wisdom or ignorance at that moment of contact and while feeling. It works exactly the same way. So though we've only described it in terms of the eye sense, you can understand how it works for all the other senses. And the essence is that if we're stupid at contact, then there will be stupid feelings, defilement, and suffering. So don't be stupid at contact. Learn to be mindful and aware. Learn to bring wisdom to that contact. That's what we need to know. The fact that at patsa, at contact, the mind isn't stupid and doesn't let any defilements arise, this fact we call a Dhammayata. This is a word that hasn't been discussed very much in Buddhism, but it's a very special and powerful word. So even if you've never heard it before, or even if you don't understand it yet, please try and remember it so that you'll learn its meaning eventually. Dhammayata is the fact that at contact, the defilements aren't allowed to arise. Dhammayata means the fact that nothing can make the mind stupid. Nothing, the fact that nothing can make the mind hot. Nothing can defile the mind. This fact we call a Dhammayata. The mind that has a Dhammayata, nothing can mess it up, nothing can heat it up, nothing can defile it. We call this a Dhammayata. It's the highest word there is in Buddhism. A Dhammayata. This Dhammayata has the value and the meaning of God. This Dhammayata that doesn't let any defilements arise when we are seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, or experiencing through the mind. This not letting any defilements come up is a Dhammayata, and this has the same meaning as God. This Dhammayata can watch over and protect us just like any God would be able to do. So this is the highest thing there is in Buddhism. Having a Dhammayata is like having God always watching over and protecting us. If you practice anapanasati, mindfulness with breathing, correctly and successfully, then you will have sufficient Dhammayata to watch over you, to protect you. This Dhammayata will keep the defilements from ever happening. They'll keep any ignorance from cooking up the defilements. And this will be like having God there all the time. So try and practice anapanasati so that you have this atamayata to protect you. Atamayata means not being stupid when there is contact while there is feeling. And so then we don't let the contact in feeling, we don't let craving arise, we don't let upadana, grasping and clinging, arise. And so there's no dukkha. This is atamayata. Have it at patsa, and then everything is fine, and we're safe. Further, atamayata will not allow the feelings to become positive or negative. And if the feelings aren't positive or negative, then no defilements come up. Then having atamayata is the same as having mindfulness and wisdom and clear comprehension and everything we need to control the defilements, to prevent the defilements. So whether we talk about mindfulness or wisdom, right understanding, or clear comprehension or concentration, all of these things can be developed and acquired through correctly practicing mindfulness with breathing. And then you'll have all of these things, mindfulness, wisdom, clear comprehension, and concentration, have them all in the form of atamayata, meaning that the defilements can't arise. In the time that remains, we'll talk about an outline or bird's eye view of mindfulness with breathing, talking about the body, the feelings, the mind, and Dhamma. The first stage of the practice is called Gayanupassana, the contemplation of body. And the essence of this contemplation of body is breathing correctly so that the body is calmed, calming the body, making the body very peaceful through correct breathing. This is the essence of Gayanupassana. In the word anapanasati, the words ana and pana come from the word pana, which means the breath, or in Sanskrit, the prana. Prana is an ancient Indian word that goes back way before Buddhism. Prana then often just meant life. And the thing that the ancient Indians wanted most of all is to breathe in prana, breathe in life. Breathe in the life from outside so that one has plenty of life inside. So by breathing in correctly, one brings in lots of prana. And then life, one is fresh and cool and peaceful and alive by correct breathing. This is the way it's talked about in the old Indian terms. If you don't believe that way of looking at things, it doesn't matter. You can just think of it in terms of oxygen. If you bring in oxygen in the right amount, in the right way, then physically life will be just right. This is what the first stage of mindfulness with breathing is about. To understand this word prana, we'd like to remind you of a story in the Bible, how when God took a bunch of dust and soil and formed it into the shape of a man, and then God breathed prana into that lump of soil, and it became Adam and then Eve. It was this breath of life from God that animated the lump of clay, dust. And so in life, if we want to have bodies that are healthy, that are capable of doing the work of life, bodies that are efficient, bodies that have the ability to do whatever we need to do, then this matter of the prana is very, very important. Knowing how to breathe correctly, this will give us all kinds of, make our bodies fit and able to do many different things. So there's a lot of importance in understanding this business of the prana and the first aspect of practicing mindfulness with breathing. In the second stage or area of anapanasati, we contemplate the feelings, the vedana. We take the best feelings that can occur, the cream of all feelings, and we study them. The cream of the feelings are what we call piti, satisfaction, a very excited kind of satisfaction. And then sukha, which is happiness. This is the top of the feelings, the cream of the feelings. Normally they deceive us and trick us in all kinds of ways. But if we're able through anapanasati to understand them so that these feelings, these best of feelings, can no longer trick us, then we'll never again have any problems with any of the feelings. We don't have to go and worry about all possible kind of feelings. Just get these best feelings, these most attractive, most powerful, seductive feelings under control, and then none of the feelings will have any power over us. Then we know the nature of the feelings as well as is possible, so that they'll never again be able to deceive us in positive or in negative ways ever again. The third stage of anapanasati is contemplation of mind, cittanupassana. In this we study all possible kinds of mind. We study all the different kinds of mind, and then learn to be able to regulate the mind, to maintain it in whatever shape or condition we need it to be in. Through this third area of mindfulness of breathing, we can regulate the mind in any condition that we wish. Then the last stage or area is Dhammanupassana, contemplation of Dhamma, of truth, of natural truth, the truth of all nature. We study the truth of all natures, of all things, until we see that all things, we see every aspect, every level, every nook and cranny of natural truth. We look and see that everything in nature is impermanent, constantly changing, that constant change is unsatisfying and oppressive, and that in all that there's nothing that can be called a self. We see it's all just a process of conditionality, just a flow of actions and reactions. Studying this until seeing atamayata, where none of it can lead to any defilement, so that none of it can bring up any clinging, any grasping in the mind, especially grasping at anything as I, as mine, as self. Understanding all this is the meaning of the last stage of anapanasati. Understanding the truth of things until nothing has the power to stir up any attachment, and so that we know there's nothing worth attaching to ever again. So there are these 4 stages or areas of practice in mindfulness with breathing. Each of these stages is made up of 4 steps. So altogether there are 16 steps. That's all there are, these 16 steps. If you do your best, in your best way, to practice anapanasati on all levels, then you'll end up with the best possible thing you could ever find, which is atamayata, so that there's no more foolishness at contact, and so no more defilements come up, and there's no more burning and tormenting of the mind. Through through anapanasati, you can get this adamayada, and then there will be no more misery, no more dukkha for the mind. So practice this as best you can, do your best, and then with time, you'll end up with this best possible thing. So may you all be successful in your practice of anapanasati, and may you all have enough adamayada to kill Satan. And if everyone in the world can kill Satan, then there's no more Satan in the world. May we end today's lecture at this time.